Are you ready?
Shammer, drop off.
Coming to you live on the air.
You are now tuned in. An informed state of mind.
Hello, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to An Informed State of Mind. Isom, your host Luke here. Welcome back. Yeah, I was off for a little while there. I come down with a bit of a cold or something of that nature. Kind of thought, I felt like it was hit by a truck, I'm going to be honest with you. It's on the go around here, that's for sure. A few people and friends and colleagues that I was speaking with, everybody seems to be having their little bout with it. Time of the year, of course, we're getting lots of cold snaps and some thawing snaps, so warm, cold. Whether that has something to do with it, hard to say. But in that time frame, I was doing some talking with a few people. I was talking to Shammer. We were talking about cognition or cognitive bias, just talking about all the different types of biases there were. Right off the get-go, we had a conversation in regards to information bias. And how I was defining information bias was actually more related to research bias. And when we were talking about it, it almost seems like it should be reversed, because when you think about research, it would tend to lean towards scientific research. But when you actually look at the information bias or the definition to information bias, it kind of seems reversed to that. Now, as I was going through it, and I said, I want to do a bit of a podcast on bias. And this is systematic to looking at it from an informed state of mind standpoint, right? And I'm trying to do this podcast as some kind of, not a roadmap, if you would, or a route, I guess, throughout. But I wanted to have it in some kind of order to some degree, I guess. And there's so many different types of biases, and I mean, we could list them, and they would just go on and on and on and on. We have there's everything: confirmation bias, the hindsight bias, anchoring bias, and talking about the self-serving bias. It just goes on and on, right? But the point of the matter is, and what I wanted to really emphasize was this. So I said, should I go about it by listing the different types of biases, or the three different types of main biases that human beings have a tendency to gravitate towards on how they make decisions in their everyday life? And I was talking to Shammer again, like I said, and I was talking to my dad. And my dad is an older fella, he's over 70 now, and he said, how many people are going to actually understand what you're saying? You could give them the information, give them a definition, but how are they going to, do you think they're going to retain that information? Or do you think you should talk to them like we're having a conversation now? I said, there was actually a pretty good point to that. If I was speaking to somebody in my job, and let's just say there was a member of the public and I was speaking to them, would I go about talking about different bias? If there was a person who was having a dispute with their neighbor, and they said, no, I believe that let's just use a fence line, for instance, because that's a common civil dispute. It's not really a police matter. It's more of a civil matter that they have to take up with lawyers and property assessments and so on. But when we go there, just primarily to keep the peace and to give some direction, right? So keep the peace, give them some direction, how they can solve the issue so that it doesn't become a repeat problem. And we can find some kind of solution going forward, right? And maintain the peace. You can talk to one neighbor and they say, no, I am sure of it. And I say, what, do you have a survey of your property? They said, well, no, I don't, but I've had this, this has been in the family for a while. That fence has always been there for the last 50 years. And I can't see them getting it wrong. Well, and that may be, right? So what kind of bias is that exactly? Now, is that, a confirmation bias? But really at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. The idea is that we have to be able to go back to look at the facts. And so it was kind of like my dad had said. He said, instead of actually talking about the individual types of biases and breaking those down, he says, you kind of sound like a smarty pants. I had to laugh. And I said, yeah, I suppose you're right. He says, but at the end of the day, if you're going to be talking to somebody who's intelligent enough to understand all those different definitions and remember them, and then make a difference in their life to apply those, he says, I'd be shocked if you actually reached anybody with that approach. If they already understand all of that, that's probably not the people you wanted to reach. And if that's the case, you're trying to reach out to somebody that may not be able to remember all these things, and they might say, that's not really important. He says, what's your point? Well, my point is that I want people to be able to say, look at both sides of the coin, right? And I go back, and this is only because I guess we're getting into, and we're seeing everything on the elections right now, whether it's U.S. or whether it's Canada, and those are the two primary ones because they're closest to us in our media and our news. So I said, I think you're right. I mean, if we look at, we all like to believe that we're rational and logical, but the fact is that we're continually under influence of, cognitive biases. And these biases distort thinking, they influence beliefs, and sway the decisions and judgments that many people make each and every day. And sometimes, cognitive biases are fairly obvious, right? You might even find that you recognize these tendencies in yourself or others when you're having a conversation, or you're trying to figure out something, or you're trying to defend a point, right? Now, one person you can see is clearly on the other side of the coin, and you represent the opposing side of that coin. And you're trying to maybe perhaps convince another person that your side of the coin makes more sense. And perhaps it does, right? And so primarily we have a tennis match between the Democrats and the Republicans, or the conservatives and the liberals, when you're talking Canada. Well, this is how we coin it here, certainly. But at the end of the day, everybody has their beliefs and what's important to them. Now, if you're going to go to a voting booth, and you're going to go up and make, a determination based on the parties that maybe you think are best suited for your life, your family, your job, your finances, and you're looking at it from a standpoint of 4 years, right? And you could say, well, it's a 5-year plan. I think this is why a 5-year plan kind of works, because it'll lead you into the next election year, right? So if you say, this is my 5-year plan, and I think that there'll be some correction there if, say, an opposing party gets in. Right. And maybe that 5 years is not the party that you would vote in. And maybe that's going to hurt you in your career, or maybe that's going to hurt you your finances, whether it's the housing market. Like I said, if you're looking to buy another home, get out of the home you're in, or get your first home. And people could say here in Canada, certainly the Liberal government is making it harder and harder. Right. And it is the Liberal government doing that. Right. And some would say, well, we need to have a PC party. And it looks like it's going to probably go that direction here in Canada. Now, whether you like Liberals and whether you like the PCs, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, I don't think anyways, right? Because you're going to have 4 years, guaranteed 4 years, right, of one party or the other getting in. But what bias do you bring forward, right, when you're looking at that going into the voting booth, right? Because somebody's going to lose. I guarantee it, right? So, but when you're making these decisions, what are you basing it on? Are you basing it on the media intake that you're getting? Are you basing it on family? You're basing it on the news that you intake? And we know that algorithms, certainly Google's a great example of that, even Twitter. I mean, if you go up there and say, I was reading there on X there, just was it last night or this morning, and I was reading on X, and someone said, I find it really odd that I follow everything Democratic or PCs, the Democrats or the PC party, let's just say, I follow everything that's related to them, and somehow the opposing side's getting their message through. I found that really interesting. They refused to look at the other side of the coin. Matter of fact, they purposely went out and followed only the one side. And I think there's major error in that, right? You need to have all of the information. Now, there might be a bit of a bias in me thinking that way because of the fact that I'm a law enforcement officer, and we're supposed to, in the justice system, look at all of the evidence, not just evidence that suits me or my ideologies, whether I believe or not believe in something or have a personal belief in something. I have to put that to the sidelines and look at everything with a non-biased point of view on that, right? And then make determinations based on what existing facts are available for me to come to a conclusion on how I'm going to move forward with that, right? Or how I'm going to usher someone else to try to move in that direction, right? And compel them to do a certain thing. Right. So I think that it's important to maybe not really take and again, I think me and Shammer are probably going to have a talk about this later on after certainly this comes out. There is different types of biases. And I think I'm going to put it back on the listener to go and actually look at that. Now, someone's going to say, that's a bad idea, Luke, because nobody's going to actually do that. Then I'll say, you know what, that's on them. That is absolutely on them. I appreciate the fact that they found this podcast. I really do. right? And I appreciate the fact that they've stuck around for the conversation. But at some particular point, we have to put it back on the individual to say, look, I can tell you about this, but if you're going to maintain the bias that you have, and you don't even understand you have a bias, then as far as I'm concerned, you're doomed. You really are. Now, someone would say, well, maybe that's not the case. Because look, I understand there's people out there who have gone their entire career working at the same factory. They grew up on the same street. Matter of fact, they grew up on the street, took the property over from their folks when they got married and had kids. And so it's the same street. They have a block party, a barbecue, and what have you, and it's been perfect. Their factory never got closed. Everything seemed to went relatively well. Whether the other half of the partnership in there, mom and dad, whether they were both working, or certainly a partner relationship where both partners are working, or if one stays home, or one works from home, because that's a big thing nowadays too, isn't it? But they've never seemed to ran into much of a problem. They seem to put away for retirement, no problem. They've got savings. They seem to have no problem going on vacation. The kids got off to college if there was kids certainly involved. The dog and the cat seem to be fine, making sure that everything's good that way. And certainly their work-life balance it seems to be well in place. So for me to list all the different types of biases that there is, I think my dad was kind of right. He says, well, what's the point? At the end of the day, just tell them your point. Well, the point is that I think you need to be cognizant that there is bias. You can have them, and most people have multiple bias that they work off of, and depending on what they're looking at. So I thought, you know what? Yeah, why am I actually overthinking this, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I've done the research. I've looked at this. Matter of fact, I've had multiple conversations about it with some really intelligent people. I think my dad is a very intelligent person. He's blunt. A former farmer, a construction worker, certainly, and carpenter, a very smart individual. He was going to get into law enforcement, and he opted out, basically, to take care of family. And, I've discussed this with certainly Shammer. He's a very intelligent person, if you've listened to his podcast over on the Gray Man Concepts. So, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's more important to make people aware that there is such thing as bias, understand what those biases are, and apply it to your life. Do you think you have that bias? Do you take the first bit of information that comes to you and you anchor into that and say, that's it? That's an anchor bias, certainly. So, and say, that's it. That's what I'm going to understand. That's the first news article I read in the morning. And maybe it's because you follow Yahoo News, you follow CNN, you follow whatever it is. And maybe you only get your information from X, Twitter. And I think that's probably a better way of going. But who are you following? Because you can say, well, I get all my information from X, and I find it to be actually quite a bit more factual, and you can actually look through the comments and see other people calling each other out on that and straightening things out, and people actually are providing facts in there, and it gives you a starting point. But how much time do you want to put in that? Hey, look, I was talking to Shammer in regards to buying a microphone, right, or a camera, or anything of that nature, or a soundboard, for instance. You do a lot of research, and there's a lot of people out there that do that. But you'd be surprised how many people actually just walk into a store and say, well, I need this to do this, and that, that looks good, it's on sale, I buy it. Meanwhile, it wasn't even meant to last them 6 months, right? Because of the workmanship, the craftsmanship on it, or the quality of it. You know what I mean? You pay what you pay for what you get, right? And there's other people who say, yeah, I'm going to spend a little bit more on that. I'm going to do my research on that because there's 13 different choices. Really, 13 definitive different choices on that particular camera, for instance, or microphone. But which one is actually going to suit me for a podcast, for instance, or for a radio show as far as maybe YouTube videos, or YouTube videos you're going to do out in the wilderness? And I've been faced with that a few times. Now, and some people will put a lot of effort into that. And they don't just look at the first one they find and say, yep, that'll do, and that's it. And for some people, that's okay. And maybe that you can recognize that you have bias and you're sitting there going, yeah, but I'm still okay with that. I don't need to look at the other side of the coin. I'm okay with the Liberal Party. That makes sense to me. Like there was a fellow that I was talking with, we're just communicating through it, and he wasn't necessarily a Liberal fan. We'll come back here to Canada for a quick second here. And Trudeau certainly is the Liberal government that's been in place nearly 8 years now. And, there's a lot of pushback on the Liberal government right now, especially from the PC and even from a lot of Liberal supporters. And there's a lot of people jumping ship, okay, at least for this election. But this fella here said, look, I don't like, matter of fact, I hate Trudeau. And he says, do you think the PC government, what do you think the PC government's actually going to give you? And it was a small point that I had made. And I said at the end of the day, I said, I think it's a tennis match. I don't really think it matters who I get in this particular term, quite frankly, unless there's something in it for me, right? And there is. This particular election, if the PC government gets in, there is no doubt that there is going to be something in it for me and mine, without a doubt. And really, when it comes down to it, when it really comes down to the brass tacks, I don't care about anybody else except me and mine. And then a runner-up to that is my community, and a runner-up to that certainly is, and it goes on and on. It's not to say that I don't care about my community or my country or my neighboring countries or deals that we have with free trade. Sure, it all matters. But I have to pick myself first, and most people do. But I want to make sure that I'm actually not being biased in the sense of how I'm getting my information and how I'm going to make the decision to go forward. Because especially when it comes to elections, you've got 4 years to deal with this particular choice. And so how much research did you do? Now, someone would say, oh, I'm not going to pick either one of those parties. No, I'm going to pick maybe one of the lessers because that's the way I feel. It's something to think about. So I'm not really sure whether or not people are going to agree with me on this, not giving the definitions and what have you, but maybe I think I've made a little bit more sense by doing it this way. I said, I'm just going to have a talk off the cuff, and I'm going to explain, hey, have a look at how you think, how you process information. And I mean everything. Have a look at that. Be honest with yourself. Do you have a bias? And what would that bias be? Check it out, right? There's a lot of information online about this. Look up, cognitive bias. So Google that and then go from there, okay? You're going to be looking at a lot of different things. Cognitive bias, there's information bias. I think there's hindsight bias, it's another one that some people won't even really kind of look at. There's a lot of different biases out there, and every one of them can be certainly finding a place into our research on how we go about doing everything. So I'm not going to stress over it, because I kind of stressed over it for quite a few days on how I wanted to deliver that information. And I had this actually wrote. I mean, a couple of different times. I deleted it twice, to be honest with you. And I said, yeah, you know what? I'm not even going to bother doing that. I think I'm going to take my dad's, my dad's advice and just give him the point, right? There's 2 sides to a coin. There's 6 sides to a box, right? Or 6 sides to a dice. And each side has a very descriptive point to it, right? And you can describe each side of a dice pretty pointedly, One has 1 dot on it. Another side has 2 dots on it, and so on and so forth. The dice is green. The dice is white. The dice is made of plastic. It's made of brass, a fancy dice, for instance. Where the dice come from, why it was produced. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different tiny things that you can look at. And I guess really at the end of the day, that was my point, is that anything that we're looking at, to have an informed state of mind, right? To be informed and to create a state of mind that it comes from being informed is the best possible way to go through life, without a doubt. If you don't know, go out and chase the information. It's not enough for me to tell you about it, because I can give you information and somebody could argue that information and say, well, that's not right. I said, that's a very good point. It may not be correct. So if you want to really know, then be fair to yourself. Understand the biases you're up against and chase the information. It's like when we talk about training, law enforcement officers. Don't have ego when you come into the door with training, right? Leave it all at the door. Leave it home. Never adopt that ideology. Keep it out of your life. Ego will set you back, right? It just will, right? And it closes the door to gaining new information. And it's filled with bias. So I think we'll leave it there. Let me know, right? This is the one I really want people to let me know. Go over to the YouTube channel, have a chance to leave some comments there. Reach out to us at aninformedstateofmind@gmail.com and aninformedstateofmind@gmail.com. You can send us an email there if you just want it to be a private message. If you want to ask a question, certainly in the on the Spotify there, you can certainly do that as well. Okay, and maybe I'll put something out in the polls there for this one as well. So anyway, so thanks to my dad and Shammer. Appreciate the conversation. But that's it. That's how we're going to actually put this one out. And like I said, it's just, there's so much to it that I think it would be, it doesn't even make sense, right, for me to break them all down. And that's my thinking on it. And I think there's some merit to that. So anyway, till next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care, have fun, and never stop gaining, sharing, and maintaining your knowledge. Bye for now. Echo, did you like the show? This has been a Rush Creek production.